Hello and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Pyongyang test fires a new intercontinental ballistic missile. This part of the Euro cycle of tests and sanctions, or is this have tensions on the Korean Peninsula coming to a head? Saudi Arabia leads an Islamic counter-terrorism summit without rivals Iran and Qatar. And Beijing tightens regulation over the city's kindergartens after a scandal over child abuse in a school for toddlers. Are efforts to improve teaching standards enough? We begin today's program with the Korean Peninsula. The DPRK announced on early Wednesday morning that it successfully test-fired a newly developed intercontinental ballistic missile, Hwasong-15. The nation's leader Kim Jong-un said that after the missile launch, that the DPRK has finally realized the great historic cause of completing the state nuclear force. As in the past, the test drew strong condemnation from countries and international organizations, which did little to stop Kim's military ambition, at least for now.
It's hard to know how many times Ri Chun-hee, a senior broadcaster only appears for significant developments, have announced a landmark in the DPRK's military program. For those who gathered outside Pyongyang's main train station watching the news, it's another exciting moment that's worth celebrating.
I'm very confident. I think that the success of the Hwasong-15 launch today shows America and the whole world how strong our military power is.
The successful launch of a new type of ICBM, the Hwasong-15, is really surprising. It really makes me feel proud and confident in our Korean people.
But people on the other side of the fence are more upset than before. The South Korean military carried out an exercise right after the announcement.
This provocation had been foreseen and anticipated by our government, so we had prepared a readiness posture.
Moon had a phone conversation with the U.S. President Donald Trump over the missile launch.
Both leaders have agreed on an unyielding and forceful response against the DPRK's provocation, based on the solid combined defense of South Korea and the U.S., and also cooperate closely with the international community to continue pressure and sanctions on the DPRK to usher it along to the negotiating table.
China, for its part, said it was seriously concerned and opposed the DPRK's test firing.
China strongly demands the DPRK abide by the UN Security Council resolutions and refrain from actions that heighten the tension on the Korean Peninsula.
Beijing has proposed a dual-track approach, seeking to advance denuclearization and establish a parallel peace mechanism. It has called on Pyongyang to freeze its missile and nuclear activities and has called on Washington to put its joint military drills with South Korea on hold. But in the foreseeable future, both proposals wouldn't likely become reality, leaving the stability of the Korean Peninsula in limbo.
For more on the DPRK's latest missile launch, let's turn to our panel. We are joined in our Beijing studio, Zhao Tong, who is the associate at the Carnegie's Nuclear Policy Program, based at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome, sir. In Boston, in the United States, Jim Walsh, who is with the Security Studies Program at MIT, longtime observer of the DPRK nuclear program. I want to start with you, Mr. Walsh. Exactly, technically speaking, where is DPRK or North Korea right now in a possibility of launching nuclear weapons toward continental United States, even the United States capital, Washington, D.C.?
Well, I'd say it's getting pretty close. It's not quite there yet. There's still a few technical obstacles that have to be overcome, a re-entry vehicle, the miniaturization of a warhead that would fit on top of a ICBM, making sure it's really reliable, that it works when you want it to work, those sorts of issues. But in the main, they have built a missile that can reach the United States. They have built nuclear weapons in the past, so I think it's only a matter of time before they're able to marry the two different things that they have.
probably the matter of time is even faster than the matter of time many people would imagine. Mr. Zhao, here is the statement coming from the DPRK side. It said, quote, completing the state nuclear force, end of quote. What exactly does that mean from your perspective?
I think that's the most important question everyone should be asking right now, because it could be a potentially very important signal that North Korean government is trying to send to everyone. In their official statement after the recent missile launch, they mentioned the word completion twice. It could mean that they think they have already obtained all the basic technologies for their missile program, and therefore there is no need to conduct additional missile tests anymore. If that's the case, I think that really opens a diplomatic opportunity for engagement. So this is where many experts disagree. Some believe North Korean they haven't obtained some remaining technical capabilities, such as the reentry vehicle, the miniaturization of warhead that Mr. Wash just mentioned. But others believe maybe North Korea have already obtained that capability. And most importantly, for deterrence to work, North Korea doesn't need to have a 100% reliable capability. As long as it can plant some doubt in the mind of North Korea's enemy about whether the technology works, as long as its enemy believes that there is a chance it could work, then North Korea deterrence works, it holds.
But it depends on whether DPRK is really thinking about deterrence or other purposes, right? Because there is also a debate about what exactly is North Korea's purpose at the end of the day. Mr. Wash, in Washington, that debate is more fearful than anywhere else in the world, I guess. What do you think are some of the biggest possibilities of DPRK's purpose? And as a result, how should the United States prepare for that? And of course, your allies too.
Well, as for North Korean intentions, there are several possibilities here. And of course, we don't know. We don't know what is in the mind of Chairman Kim. But one possibility is nuclear weapons are purely for deterrence, as our colleague was just discussing. And if that's the case, then we should be able to navigate this, because we don't want to attack them and they would not attack us. And we would have sort of classic Cold War deterrence. But it may be that there are other motivations that are driving Kim. One possibility is that he has adopted sort of a Pakistani strategy, that once he has the cover of nuclear weapons, he will feel emboldened to carry out smaller scale conventional provocations just below the nuclear threshold, thinking that his nuclear deterrent will give him protection. That would be a very bad outcome. That is obviously a much more aggressive, offensive dominated style. I think at the end of the day, North Korea just wants to be North Korea. You know, the Kim family wants to rule and hold on to power. That's probably the best bet, but we don't know. We simply don't know.
Mr. Zhao, do you know better?
Yeah, I think it's possible that North Korea has been watching international response rhetoric about its missile capabilities. Maybe they are even watching our show right now. So they know there is a debate within the international community about its ultimate intention behind its nuclear capabilities. So in its official statement released today, they made it very clear that they will not use their nuclear weapons unless their own security is infringed upon. And their nuclear weapons present no threat to any other country or any other region that doesn't threaten North Korea. So clearly it wants to clarify its intention, which is its weapons are primarily for strategic deterrence purpose.
Is it really true? An unnamed DPRK official was quoted recently by CNN saying there will be no diplomacy with the U.S. until it has proven its nuclear capabilities. First, the DPRK must test an ICBM capable of reaching the United States. Then it needs to detonate a nuke above ground. Experts say Wednesday's missile does have the capability of reaching the United States, even the Washington, D.C., if it is not fitted with a heavier warhead. Of course, all of these are the analysis experts give from outside the DPRK. What exactly is the situation? Nobody really knows. Here comes the thing, the dilemma. What should the other react? Because we all know it is the DPRK that is really driving the whole rounds of action and reaction, pro and con, and tit for tat campaigns. Yet, Mr. Walsh, some have noticed it's been 2.5 months since the last test of North Korea. It was only happening recently, 2 days after the United States, this administration right now in the White House declared DPRK once again going back to the list of countries that sponsor terrorism. Well, what should we make of it?
Well, I want to say, first of all, that no one enjoyed these past 2 months without tests more than I did. It was nice to have a break. That break seems to be over. Now, was the president's designation as of North Korea as a state sponsor of terror, did this cause this test? I don't think so. As we were just discussing, North Korea sort of has its testing plans. It's trying to reach a certain level of capability, regardless of what's going on politically. It has certain scientific or technological objectives so that it can achieve deterrence. It probably would have conducted this test anyway. But I will say I think the designation was unhelpful. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't think North Korea is out there supporting Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab. And certainly there's at least the possibility, let me put it this way, designating them as a state sponsor of terror gave them no reason to not go ahead with their test.
All right.
In other words, you know, they were probably going to do it anyway, but certainly having that happen gave them the green light that they should go ahead.
Mr. Walsh, I also want you to clarify for us, if you know any better than all of us, President Trump talking about we'll take care of it, end of quote. What exactly does that mean? Yes. Does the United States have plans? Of course, there are plans that could be secretive, that nobody should know, otherwise it would not become plans for deterrence. And yet there should be plans, at least structures of plans, that everybody knows that could use also as a deterrence.
Yeah, so when you say, don't worry, I'll take care of it, that's another way of saying, I don't have anything to say. You know, there is no super secret magic plan to be used. The president has been in office almost a full year. This is the third ICBM test. If there was a super secret magic plan, I would think we would have already seen it by now.
All right.
What we have seen before is him saying this. He says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I think he's just trying to brush off the questions.
I see. Mr. Zhao, question to you as well. What about from China's side? I mean, this is not long after China's president sent its emissary to the DPRK to brief the other side about the 19th Party Congress that this test happened. Meanwhile, China expressed a deep concern and also deep regrets about what exactly is happening. And yet, you know, it's already happened. What can China really do at this point?
You know, a major reason why previous diplomacy efforts with North Korea have largely failed is because North Koreans themselves didn't think they have got what they need in terms of nuclear and missile capabilities. But today, with this new ICBM test, they said explicitly they have completed their missile program. It seems that North Korea is signaling a willingness to undertake some self-restraint. The important thing is the international community takes upon this opportunity and try to encourage North Korea to go further to demonstrate its willingness to implement its self-restraint. We have previous cases where such opportunities for engagement were squandered. North Korea offered to suspend its nuclear missile test since 2 years ago until the last May, but that proposal was quickly dismissed. So we saw North Korea went ahead and conducted more tests to build better capabilities. I think right now we should take this opportunity and try to make North Korea better clarify what it means by completion of the program. Does it mean no more ICBM test, or even including no more submarine launched basic missiles? I think that's very important.
But Mr. Zhao, let me just be realistic a little bit. Who will be able to do that, to ask them to clarify exactly what it means, because they are saying what they're saying as a result of trying to, you know, in a way, use it as a deterrence against the others who they consider as the enemy. Having said that, though, Mr. Zhao, China said deep opposition, deep concern against this strike, and yet what is the road ahead? The double suspension plan that China has been suggesting seems never comes into the ears of the United States, not South Korea either. Today, South Korea fired 3 missiles to, quote, show an attitude of force, end of quote. So what will be the plan? Are we going to wait just as we did 8 years ago with the Obama administration with so-called strategic patience, nobody doing anything, everything go ahead with DPRK? And here we are. Mr. Zhao.
I agree. I think with this additional missile test, during which North Korea demonstrated better capabilities, I think it deserves more economic punishment. I think that's what everyone is doing. There will be a new UN Security Council meeting very soon. There will be additional measures taken by the international community to further sanction North Korea, that's for sure.
Right.
But in order to understand whether North Korea is really serious about its rhetoric, the only way to do that, to know their intention, is to talk to them. Rather than relisting them as a state sponsor of terrorism, we should talk to them to ask them what you mean by completing your missile program.
Right.
And does that also include your nuclear program?
Okay, let's go to Mr. Walsh. Very briefly, your thoughts, sir. Next step for everybody else.
Well, Tian, you know I'm a fan of engagement. I agree with my colleague completely that we should be talking to them, if only out of our national interest, to protect ourselves against war by mistake. But when they say that they've completed that missile program, that might really only be referring to the ICBM. I fear that we are going to get submarine launched ballistic missile testing over the next period of time. That's going to make engagement difficult. When we had that 2 months of quiet, that was really the chance to get serious about diplomacy. We are now once again in a season of testing sanctions, which will be followed by large-scale military exercises by the U.S. and South Korea, and the North Koreans refusing to talk to us.
Right.
I hope we haven't missed an opportunity these past 2 months, but I do think we're going to get more testing of one kind or another.
You know what? I really want to disagree with you, but it seems that some of the things you just mentioned, Mr. Walsh, could be some of the realities to happen. For now, I want to thank both of you for coming over to our show on a very short notice. Zhao Tong and also Jim Walsh. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. And you're watching World Insight with Tian Wei. We'll be back after this.
In this episode of Travelogue, as part of the Pearl River series, we're visiting Shaguan City, that's in the northern part of Guangdong Province. I'll be sampling the visual delights of picturesque Mount Dansha and soaking up the cultural and historical heritage of the Hakka people.
Ideas nurtured by creative energy, free to flourish. As China embarks on a new journey of opening up and innovation, the best of global business gather to strategize. CGTN takes you to Guangzhou. Pioneer of progressive policies. Experience the entrepreneurial buzz at the Fortune Global Forum, Guangzhou. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live Monday to Friday on CGTN. Saudi Arabia has held the first meeting of a new Islamic counterterrorism alliance. The kingdom's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has vowed to pursue terrorists until they are wiped from the face of the earth. Sunday's gathering is the Islamic Military Counterterrorism Coalition's first meeting since the group's formation was announced in 2015. There are 41 countries in the coalition, most of them Sunni majority or ruled by Sunnis. Shia-dominated Iran as well as Syria and Iraq are excluded. The meeting comes amid escalating tensions between Riyadh and Tehran. Earlier last week, Russia, Iran, and Turkey have also launched a major diplomatic push to end the Syrian crisis. For more about this, we are joined in our Beijing studio by Yan Shuai, an analyst at the Anti-Terrorism Center at the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. In Riyadh, we have Salman al-Ansari, a political analyst who is the founder and president of the Saudi American Public Relations Affairs Committee. In Boston, we have once again Jim Walsh, who is with the Security Studies Program with Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, I want to welcome to the three of you. Exactly, Mr. al-Ansari, how should we interpret this first meeting since the group was found in 2015 when it comes to anti-terrorism?
Thank you, Time Wei, for having me. It's actually a very important step that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has taken with its allies in the Muslim world. If we look at the time of the inception of this coalition, it was actually in the 15th of December 2015, so it was like almost like 2 years ago. And right now they have actually told the people and made it public about the strategies and the matrix and the KPIs of this coalition and its objectives, which is very important, because right now in the Arab and Muslim world and in the whole world, we are actually facing, let's call it by its name, an existential threat, which is radicalism, extremism, and how there are countries that want to radicalize the youth and how they want to take over countries, etc. So if we look at this, I think it's a very important step that the kingdom has taken.
Wow.
It's a coalition. It's the biggest of its kind. It's the biggest of its kind when it comes to the Muslim world being in one synthesized kind of objective to combat terrorism, not only to combat it militarily, but also the 3 M's, men, mindset, and money, to go and combat it from its roots, which is a very good step, and I encourage it highly.
All right, al-Ansari, I can see you're a cheerleader of that strategy and certainly the meeting, but many say it wouldn't take place if Iran has not got an upper hand in the Middle East over Saudi Arabia toward the issue of terrorism. Very briefly from you, sir.
Tianwei, so the question was to me?
The question, yes, that is to you, Mr. al-Ansari.
Okay, perfect. Actually, Martin Luther King said something remarkable. He said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Light only can do that. So I think Iran is a source of darkness in the region. So I'm not very surprised that it's not actually part of this coalition, because if we look at Iraq, Iran is supporting 75 Iranian-backed militias just in Iraq. They are supporting Hezbollah, which is internationally recognized as a terrorist group. They are supporting Houthis, which is actually going against the will of the United Nations and the UN Resolution 2216. So I'm not very surprised that Iran is excluded. And
but they're also fighting IS. They
Iran,
have just claimed a virtual victory against IS, Mr. al-Ansari.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
Iran just claimed a virtual success against IS also, which is also internationally recognized as a terrorist group.
Yes, definitely. Saudi Arabia is actually part of the coalition to combat, the global coalition to combat ISIS, which is a great, we have seen a great deal of achievements in the region when it comes to combating ISIS. Iran claims to be in combating ISIS, but I don't think it's actually very accurate. If we go and look at things on the ground, we will realize that actually Iran in so many instances have actually benefited from the rise of ISIS, specifically in Syria, so they can protect the Bashar al-Assad, the brutal militant regime in Syria. So let's have it very clear. It's very clear to the region, it's very clear to the world that any militant, despicable group that wants to take over countries in the region by using the ideology of political Islam, etc., will be confronted heavily, not only by the region, but by the whole Muslim world and by the whole world.
Let's go to Mr. Walsh. I see you waving your head from time to time while your colleague in Riyadh is talking. Help us to understand your thought.
Well, you know, if this was what it says it is, I'd be all in favor of it. I mean, who's against battling terrorists? But, you know, I'm deeply skeptical, and I must say my colleague from Saudi Arabia gives us all the reason for skepticism. Right? He begins by saying terrorism, and then he spends the next, you know, most of his time talking about how bad Iran is. This is not about terrorism. It's about Saudi Arabia's rivalry with Iran. That's its #1 priority, not terrorism. Iran is its #1 priority. And, you know, I just can't take it very seriously. Saudi Arabia has supported violent religious extremists for years. Wahhabism has been the ideological bedrock of Sunni-led extremism. 90% of the deaths, according to one study, that come from terrorism come from Sunni groups, Sunni extremists, not Shias, not the Iranians or the Lebanese or others. And yet that's what the focus is. And the fact that you've excluded Iraq, Iran, Qatar, which you are, you know, basically trying to boycott while you carry out this, you know, campaign in Yemen, killing civilians, and then setting up an embargo to prevent humanitarian aid. I'm just really skeptical that Saudi Arabia is the shining light to fight terrorism. And this is really more about the new leaders, the new crown prince's aggressive, I would say, military program in the Middle East.
All right. Mr. Yan, you heard your two colleagues talking about different views, certainly, to say the least. One thing is for sure, the Middle East is changing so fast these days, just over the past few months as a result of decades of development, of conflicts and uncertainties. What do you make of Iran and Saudi Arabia both holding high, at least in rhetoric, the banner against the terrorism? Eventually, that rivalry will turn into what, Mr. Yan?
Yes, the meeting of the coalition after the establishment of 2 years, I think it signifies the intensified confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Because in recent several years, I think Iran has been improved its influences regionally and internationally. We see in Iraq, it helped the Iraqi government to eradicate ISIS in Iraq, and in Syria, it helped Assad regime to get rid of the ISIS also. And also in the Yemen, Iran are backing the Houthi rebels, while the Saudi Arabia are leading a coalition to fight the Houthi rebels. So I think this is not a good news for the region and also for the international community's campaign against terrorism, because the terrorism actually, I think, Islamic State is not defeated, although it almost lost all the territory in Syria and Iraq, but ISIS is expanding and infiltrating to other places of the world. So I think the other members of the coalition, such as the weak and small Muslim countries, they have their own worries and own interest. They want the Saudi Arabia, they want the international community to help them to prevent the Islamic State from being expanded to their country.
Right. But having said that, though, Mr. Walsh, we need to look at some of the facts also. When we talk about so-called virtual success against Islamic State claimed by Iran, not long after Tehran said that, there was already a huge terrorist attack in Egypt, which was claimed by IS. Whether that's true or not, we do not know at this point, but this is very clearly demonstrating to us that IS is not just about clusters of ground forces that is showing on the map. It is scattered around the region with the potential of using ideology to seduce people. So, Mr. Walsh, how much is IS, from your perspective, being defeated now? Can any country claim a victory now, Mr. Walsh?
Well, we talked about this before, Tian, and my view has been we can defeat ISIS in terms of its original objective, which was setting up a caliphate. In other words, its first goal was to actually take a piece of territory and set up its own state. Well, they have failed at that. I think we can declare victory over that objective. And it wasn't just Iran. It was Iran and the Kurds, and it was the Iraqi forces and a variety of different groups and countries, the United States included, that were attacking ISIS, pushing them out of Iraq, and preventing them from setting up a state. So that's a victory. But, as we've discussed before, now they will shift, right? They will disperse. They will no longer have setting up the caliphate as their objective, and they will revert to terrorism. So the irony here, and it is an irony, is that while we have defeated them in terms of their first objective, setting up a state, nevertheless, what will probably happen, that will result in an increase, not a decrease, an increase in terrorism as they shift their objectives. And as they can no longer win on the battlefield straight up, fighting to fighting in a city, they will now shift increasingly to terrorism. So we will see more terrorism by them and by their affiliates in other countries, like in the Sinai in Egypt.
Things are not just as easy as it is between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Of course, there are a lot of complicating pictures of geopolitics as well behind, with some of the major powers of the world all having its influence in the region, and have as a result related to the issues of fight against terrorism. For now, I want to thank the three of you, gentlemen, whatever perspective you have, for your input and your insights. Yan Shuai, Salman Al-Ansari, Jim Walsh. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us, the three of you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. City kindergartens are under close security after police confirm reports of child abuse in a Beijing school. What measures are needed to make child protection a priority? The answers, hopefully, right after this break.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all.
The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
We have come a long way. Changes happen, and fast, from all corners, different lives, voices, and visions. Encouraged to think, enlightened to change. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Now let's shift our topic to child protection. In the past week, a Beijing kindergarten has been under public scrutiny. Red, Yellow, Blue, or RYB, one of the country's biggest early education institutes, has been accused of child abuse. According to the latest police investigation, one of the 22-year-old teacher there had pricked children who resisted nap time with sewing needles. She is being held in criminal detention. But the police also said that the claims by many parents that their children had been molested and drugged at the kindergarten were unsubstantiated. That is the words coming from the police. China's Ministry of Education has asked the schools nationwide to take effective measures to improve teaching standards while tightening supervision measures. Though this may be one isolated case, it does reflect how much more efforts are needed to improve child protection in China, no matter where the children are. For more on child protection, we are joined in our Beijing studio Gao Zhikai, who is a current affairs commentator. In Washington, D.C., we have Christopher Chambers, a professor of journalism with Georgetown University. I want to welcome both of you, gentlemen. Mr. Gao, this has been quite a thing here in China. If you look at social media, everybody is talking about it.
Yes, indeed. I think this latest development is very shocking to most people here in Beijing, as well as nationwide in China, mainly because protection of children is such an important matter which has a bearing on most of the families here in China. And any news about child abuse, especially by a well-established kindergarten institution, is shocking, and they demand the government take measures to launch a full and thorough investigation into the real situation and also take measures to prevent such abuses from happening again in the future.
Professor Chambers, we have heard, I shouldn't say similar cases, but cases of severity of child abuse also in other countries as well, with the recent Boston Globe's revelation of some of the church deeds, also as an example. Investigation like this, what does it take? How much does it take for society to be able to really protect our children?
The positive thing is that you do have such pressure from parents, and, either directly through to their elected officials or through social media and traditional media such as television, that can help bring pressure on the institutions and on the police to really, and prosecutors to do their job, because this is such a visceral, emotional issue on many levels, because you also have a situation where you have, as in China, as in the United States, families that have to work. People have to go to work, and they have to turn over their children to people that they can trust. And if the trust is broken down, you have a fundamental piece of society that is just not working. So it behooves everyone in law enforcement, prosecutors, government, industry, to work together to solve this. So we have had some very terrible situations with religious schools and daycare centers and kindergartens, and with government run daycare centers in the United States, and even in the capital city, Washington, D.C., where I am now. We've had some terrible situations.
Mr. Gao, now one of the things is to look at the further investigation of this case by the police and also by the government. The other thing, of course, is what are some of the institutional buildings that needs to be done in order to avoid any incidents like this from happening, even this degree, as long as we adults are committed to the children, Mr. Gao?
Yeah, first of all, I think as far as this particular situation is concerned, the government and the law enforcement agent really need to demonstrate that they are committed to do a thorough investigation into the real situation, and this will be a big step in restoring public trust in the kindergarten system in China. Secondly, going forward, I think the educational system need to come up with higher standards and also enforce these standards in the kindergarten system. And I think efforts need to be made to avoid, for example, putting the blame on one or two individual teachers, rather than holding the institution itself responsible and accountable for the child abuse which may have taken place, mainly because the culpability should not be restricted just to one teacher or two teachers. The institutions themselves need to be held accountable for such child abuse, wherever and whenever it happens.
Well, it could be a kindergarten, it could be other entities, but many of these ones could be private as well. So there's another way of making sure that it would work, that is through capital, through the votes of shares and through the votes in the stock market. So Mr. Chamber, Professor Chamber, looking at the history of cases related to child abuse, what are some of the most important tools the public and also the public institutions could have?
I think the public must put pressure on these institutions to ensure that that teachers and staff are adequately trained, are adequately screened, are screened for personality disorders, are screened for criminal conduct. I think what you have found is that many times the people who are running these centers, kindergartens, schools, they do fit what the government or private industry, what their standards are. But when you go below that level, you tend to find people who do not fit those standards. And because there's a lot of pressure to hire people because there's many children that must be watched. That is where the breakdown occurs, not necessarily with the person running the place in terms of their qualifications, but the qualifications of the people below that person. And now, ironically, that also means that the person running the place has responsibility, total responsibility, for what happens below them. But we also have to make sure that there are qualified staff and subordinates, people below the people running these centers, that are adequately paid, that are adequately screened, that have the educational level that parents expect when they give over their children to these people.
Right. Mr. Gao, before we go, another point is how to teach the children who are very, very young in the age, be able to, at least to a certain extent, protect themselves and be able to keep some space between them and others. That could be helpful, but it's very difficult because they're so young, Mr. Gao.
Absolutely. I think professional training for the staff who need to take care of the kids, normally 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, or up to 6-year-old, is a very daunting task. People may take it for granted that any adult may be able to do that kind of job, but you really require professional training, which involves a very tender caring for the kids, but also professional skills to bring out the potentials of the kids and really provide the best caring for the kids. And I think in this particular case in Beijing, I think professional training is very much lacking in the staff mentioned involved in the alleged child abuse. And I think this should serve as a warning sign for the regulatory bodies to beef up the professional training for the staff.
Victor Gao Zhikai, Christopher Chambers, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. And thank you for your love for the children as well. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.